Hey everybody, welcome to Hammer Down. There are some guests I've been lucky enough to have on the show that I'm just truly a fanboy of. This next one is kind of amazing. She's the head of operations for ZEBOX, which is an incubator and VC firm owned by CMA CGM. She's kind of the kingmaker in the space. She has the coolest role where she looks around and says, this is a cool startup that's going to change the world. And then she gets to help those companies grow. And when you hear that, you're like, wow, this is so cool. And like, truly, it's a dream job for me. And then I look at her background and go, okay, listen, we're talking 5 years at Booz Allen Hamilton. She then moves on from Booz to start her own LTL company, then transitions over into Convoy, onto Transfix, back into the venture capital world, having started at Booz and been in finance, comes back into finance now with ZEBOX. Liz Ward, is there anything you haven't done?
Oh my gosh, I love this intro. There's plenty that I haven't done yet, and I hope to do. But it's certainly been a wild ride. I will say that, Mike.
Liz, one of my favorite questions is like, how did you get into this industry? I mean, I have a guess, but I'd love to hear like what attracted you to supply chain.
Well, I grew up in this space, so I come from our family LTL company, Ward Trucking. It's 92 years old. And so growing up, my dad ran the business and we were always exposed to it at a really young age. Like I remember our family dinners, for instance, we would talk about business and we would talk about, the company and the industry. And yet I will say this, though, Mike, I never thought I would be in this space. This is back when there was not a whole lot of technology. There was not a lot of conversation, certainly no venture capital dollars. So it was very like a traditional legacy business, but I learned a ton and I've always been a problem solver at heart. Even as a little kid, I love puzzles. Like I love the solving of big problems, I guess. And once I kind of had full autonomy later in my life, going to college and so forth, I thought the supply chain was such a cool space because it was so big, number one. It touched so many different roles and functions, and arguably it's incredibly important. And so for me, all that stuff added up. And, just the introduction that you just gave, all of my different experiences, it's not really like a linear, trajectory. It's kind of me just being curious about different things and going for them. But it's been a really, really great ride. I feel incredibly fortunate, thus far.
Awesome. Liz, talk a little bit about what you do at ZEBOX. Let's start kind of, with the nearest term. What's your role? What are the things you're overseeing? Tell me a little bit about your day-to-day.
Yeah. So at ZEBOX, it's essentially a corporate accelerator is what we're doing, where we're connecting really large companies in the supply chain. Think railroads, steamship lines, ports, companies that are busy running their operation. We're going out there and hunting for the best technology to help them solve their own problems. So it's kind of this like consultative / corporate innovation, also dabbling into new technologies. But our role at ZEBOX is essentially the connector, where we're connecting these companies with other, cutting edge founders and in new spaces and to solve problems across the supply chain. So my role at ZEBOX, I run the America, and we have 6 different hubs. And this is a cool part about our business. So our parent company is CMA CGM, one of the largest steamship lines. They're, of course, based in Marseille, France. And they started this concept back in 2017. And it was really like an incubator, Mike. Like someone would come in, they have an idea, they would help them with the deck, commercializing it, maybe get their first round of funding. And that was kind of it. And then when we saw, during COVID, so much of our space was like this gold rush. I'm sure you can attest to that, where there's so many companies and new things, and the appetite to test and to try was certainly there too. And so hence we started building these ZEBOXes around the world We started with Arlington for our US presence. And shortly after that, launched one in the Caribbean. This year we launched a hub in West Africa, Singapore, and Manchester. So that part of our business, I think, is so cool. Being able to tap into different regions of the world to see where they are, along their innovation journey.
That's such an interesting point. And, when you think about, so for instance, LA Long Beach here, I'm based in near the Long Beach port, right? And we hear about it's one of the world's cleanest ports, this, that, the other. How, at the risk of sounding like naive here, how are you sharing best practices that you learned from a place like Long Beach with a country that maybe isn't as far as advanced? And are you pushing for leaps and bounds? And then alternatively, what are you learning in places that, are kind of doing it in a different approach just because of the landscape that they're in?
Yeah. Well, it's almost like you have to start where you are, and so to go into a different region and just start talking best practice within a port or railroad or whatever, it's almost like you have to wind back the tape. In some areas you're like, how do I position a startup to a corporation? How do I de-risk that word? How do I find people who actually want to start businesses? Take West Africa. The first startup in West Africa was in 2014. And so how exciting, I look back at, our region or in the US, and we're so mature, and there are so many fantastic companies in the space doing great things. It's just at a different level, but we weren't always here. Right. So I think it's a, you learn, you grow, you teach, and then, wherever they are is where you kind of adapt to whatever they need.
How do you source the companies you're looking to invest in, or the companies you're looking to shepherd along? Are you just kind of doing nothing but going through decks? Do you have, like email me at, potential investor at, or what's, how, if I wanted to be a founder and get in front of you, how would I go about that?
Well, an easy way is you can use our email alias, which is america@zebox.io. It's ze-box.io. But that's an easy way. Another thing is we are completely free and non-dilutive to startups, which makes us very unique. And as a result, Mike, we get a lot of inbound, particularly from LinkedIn or from our other networks, just because it's really it's a bonus to so many of these companies who are already building great businesses. And all we ask is that you do what you say you do, and you do it pretty darn well. If we're going to introduce you to a multi-billion-dollar corporation, we really want you to be able to have some traction, customers, a large, like a fully formed team with functions, to be able to actually engage with these companies. But that's the criteria. Is we're looking for slightly more mature companies and ones that are solving a core need across the customer or the corporate partner base. But really, it's going back to your question. It's a lot of the organic inbound. It's our network, and then it's also relationships with VCs. Really good domain-centric VCs, which thankfully there's a lot of them out there in our space.
Sure, of course. So,
yeah,
Liz, without giving away the secret sauce, what are the types of technology or the types of players that really get you excited? What are you seeing over the next, say, 3 to 5 years on the horizon? Who's going to be, or what will kind of move the needle for the industry?
Yeah. So I really like AI as it relates to customer service. I think there's a lot of really useful applications there. And you think of how manual, the customer service function can be often, and also how hard it is to recruit and retain people in those roles. I remember this at Ward Trucking, going down to where all the people at customer service were working. And it was like this bullpen of just constant calls and emails, and just, it never stopped, And I think the use of AI and business process automation can free up a lot of those mundane tasks, whether it be quoting or just simply pricing. It could be response times, responding to the ETA, but also a little bit more complex things where you're going to miss the pickup, for instance. You have the customer on the other line who's screaming at you. Rather than saying, I don't know, I don't have a solution to give you right now, having some sort of intellectual way to provide them with options on the spot. Like, I think there's just so many use cases, even the account management, in this space, there's so many customers who have specific requirements, and thinking through how best to train people on all these things. And I would say the artificial intelligence as it relates to customer service is one thing I'm really excited about.
Very cool. And not at all where I expected you to go. And I think this is one of my favorite discussions in the industry is I think a lot of folks that come from a tech background say, look, we're going to start up. We realize that 90% of trucks on the road are part of a small fleet. We're going to aggregate them in some way and offer a consistent experience to an enterprise shipper, never realizing that second side of the house, the enterprise shipper, has their own workflows. They've got their own approach. So we have to look at it instead of one side of the industry is fragmented. Both really and truly are, it's snowflakes on both sides. So I love that answer.
It's so interesting too. It has just one big mirror.
Absolutely. And it's so very interesting in terms of like trying to figure out a solution to that, because, like if you look at a company like Walmart, they have 2,500 people with EDI in their title. For a broker to approach them and say, hey, listen, we're going to show you how to do it better. Well, if you're not talking about EDI, you're not going to work with Walmart. It's a crazy thing. So along those lines, is one of your credits, of course, on your IMDb page. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting about you was your time at Convoy. And at F3, you kind of did this impromptu chat about the experience there. I think my favorite part was how authentic you were in speaking about like the great relationships that come out of it without doing a postmortem. I mean, there's plenty of digital ink out there. What would you say are the things that are kind of last with you when considering a company like Convoy or your experience there?
I learned a lot working there. And I think, you had mentioned my bio before. I was in a traditional management consulting company, although doing really cool things. The structure was very much like a corporate America. Then going into the family business, which is a different corporate structure. And then I kind of went into the startup world, and that was my first dose of it. And I learned a lot about product and engineering and all of these amazing, in my network of just amazing engineers. They brought in a lot of really great people from Amazon from the get-go. Dan, for instance, I learned a ton from Dan Lewis. I really admire and appreciate the fact that he was so dialed into the problem, and that's one thing that when I talk to founders, you can tell the ones that are really like passionate they have the energy and the appetite to really solve it, to figure out what the layer 2, 3, 4 behind it is. And Dan did that very well, and he built a great business, around it. I thought their marketing was really great. Their software, of course, was excellent. Where they went wrong, perhaps, was their investors. And almost this notion of we're going to be Google for a freight brokerage, which you just, Mike, like a freight brokerage is a freight brokerage. Like the margins are already so small, and they ebb and flow with the cycle, which is really hard to predict. It's really hard to educate people who aren't in this space on that, because it doesn't make much sense. And you want it to be predictable, but it's not. And so I would say that's probably the downfall of Convoy, in that there was a lot of investors, a lot of high profile people who perhaps were trying to kind of mold it into something that it just simply wasn't. And it felt like the train just left the station and just got faster and faster and faster. But God, they did so much good for this industry. I mean, they completely changed the narrative. The stuff we were talking about at panels, or in the early 2010s is very different than what we've been talking about now, just, 10 years later. And I think a lot of that are companies like Convoy, who've raised a lot of money, and they're an easy target, but they've done a ton, and they've also injected a ton of talent, into this space. I'm sure you see that too from your.
Sure. I've competed with Convoy a few times, and
Yeah.
I think the point you made it about kind of where it was going versus where what ended up happening. I've worked in brokerages where we've asked the question: are we a technology company or are we a trucking company?
Yeah,
it's the wrong question. We're a services business.
That's right.
We're in the service of getting stuff from point A to point B. We're not being brought on because of the technology. Now, does the technology change the sales equation? Does it make it easier? Of course. But we're not a tech company, and we're not a trucking company because you don't have the assets under management. You're a connector, and you're a services business to both sides of that industry. I totally agree with that. And then to your point of changing the narrative, I mean, gosh, I remember the day Jennifer Wong over at Convoy started posting on LinkedIn about sustainability, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I agreed. Yes, 100%. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to go explain that smart routing was going to allow us to find backhaul and make it so that 50% of the miles trucks are driving aren't just hauling air. It was wonderful to be able to, I guess, I don't know, staying with the trucking reference, to kind of, use the tailwinds that are being created, or, use the wind that's being created from the truck first and kind of piggyback there. So I totally understand, 100%.
Yeah, they definitely made it cooler. Like, I remember graduating from college, talking to my friends, and they'd say, "Oh, Liz, what do you do?" Or not my friends, but just people talking like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm in trucking." And they're like, "What are you doing in trucking? Like, you're way too pretty or something, But I of course love the space, but they made it cool because the second those VC dollars were poured in, I think we talked about this at F3, Bono freaking invested in their company. That's never happened ever. So that was a blessing, that all of a sudden, like, the narrative of supply chain, trucking, the importance of the truck driver too, just was front and center. And they did a ton to amplify that message. And it also kind of paved the way for others to really do it too.
Liz, the final question I ask any guest here is, if you're talking to somebody who, let's say, is 21 to 23 years old, probably about to graduate college or maybe just did, and they're thinking about supply chain as an industry, what advice would you offer that person?
Oh, I mean, I'm a big fan of this industry, and I've met a ton of amazing people like here, many that I'm lucky enough to call my friends. There's no shortage of problems, and there's a ton of really smart people at it, and lots of room for growth. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of supply chain at large, again, because it's so big and it's multifaceted, and it's only getting more complex, as we consumers, want the same thing in 5 different colors, and we want it this way and that way. And, you think of all the items that are being made just to keep up with our, us, right? Like, we're the problem in many ways. But it's an amazing space that you could, the world's like your oyster, even from an international perspective too. A big fan of it. Especially if someone who's thinking about business and they want to major in something related to business. I always thought that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I'm just going to go into a really big field and then hopefully figure out something within that. So yeah, I don't know. My advice would be like, go for it. Also, but when you're in it, set your boundaries. The freight doesn't stop, but it doesn't mean that you have to keep going with it. I mean, I think that like early on in my career, I wish I would have done that a little bit more, set more personal boundaries, because there's no shortage of work that you can do. And there's always problems. And it's always kind of this implication of like, like what's next with, okay, where's it going to fall? You're constantly triaging. But I would say that, setting the boundaries, establishing really good mentors in the space has always been hugely helpful for me. And then know that everyone's kind of grinding, doing the same thing, but the grind's worth it, because the grind teaches you the business, and you can't put a price tag on that, and that opens up lots of different doors for you to do different things.
Liz, where do people find you if they want to get in touch?
LinkedIn is great. Liz Ward, or you could do our team alias at America at ZE-BOX.io.
Liz Ward, thank you so much for being on Hammer Down. To our listeners, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the episode, please, by all means, leave us a comment, leave us a review on Spotify, iTunes, any place you get your podcasts.